I spent 30 hours in Arknights Endfield as a completely new player. I didn't have any lore background, no attachment to any of these characters, and absolutely no idea what to expect going in. And after 30 hours with it, I have a decent amount to say, so let's get into it. First, let's establish what Endfield is. You play as the administrator, the leader of Endfield Industries, and you're basically tasked with exploring a hostile moon called Talos 2. At its core, the game is built around 3 different pillars: the real-time squad-based combat, the free roam exploration, and the base building system that the developers have basically described as a factory simulator sitting inside an RPG, which they're totally right about. Those 3 pillars are what the whole experience sort of revolves around, and how well they connect to each other is really what determines whether the game works or not. So let's dive a little bit deeper. Endfield is built around a few different pillars. Nothing really ever operates in isolation here, and that's something I think the game ends up getting right. At the center of it all, of course, is the main story, which is what's driving you forward, giving you a reason to be out on Talos 2 in the first place. The story pushes you into new regions, introduces new characters, and opens up more of the world as you progress. Surrounding that is the free roam exploration. And this is where a decent chunk of your time actually goes, moving through these different regions, taking on side quests, clearing out enemy groups, and just seeing what the world has to offer, which is quite a lot. The exploration feels rewarding in itself. The world is put together in a way that consistently gives you reasons to go off the main path, and the time you spend doing that rarely ever feels wasted. All of that sort of feeds back into the third pillar, which is your base and your operators. The resources you pick up exploring go into your production lines. The XP from missions and side quests level up your characters. Everything has a destination, and that's what keeps the loop moving. It's a fairly straightforward structure, but the game executes it well enough that 30 hours in it still felt like there was always something worth doing down the line. Now, of course, we have to talk about the combat system. Combat is probably the strongest part of Endfield, and an area where I think the game separates itself most from others in this genre, but it's also one of the more complex ones, and that's not shown on the surface level. It took me a few hours before I felt like I actually understood what was going on in a fight, but once it clicked, it clicked. In this game, you play with a party of 4 operators. All of them are on the field at the same time, which is worth noting because most games in this genre have you swapping between characters one at a time while the rest kind of sit idle. Here, everyone is active and you're directly controlling one operator while the other 3 fight on their own, but you have full control over when each of them fires off their abilities. This distinction matters because the combat is built around timing those decisions. Each operator has basic attacks, battle skills that pull from a shared SP bar, and an ultimate ability that charges up as the fight progresses. The basic attack chain has more going on than it looks like at first. Stringing normal attacks into strikes deals stagger damage and also restores your SP, which you'll use for your battle skills or your ultimate ability. And once an enemy's stagger bar is full, they sort of enter a staggered state where they can take increased damage, and you can land an execution hit for a big burst or additional SP recovery. So even before you're using any skills, there's a loop within that basic skill chain that rewards paying attention. The shared SP bar is where a lot of the decision making lives, because SP is a single resource that is shared across all 4 of the 4 different operators. You'll constantly be weighing on who needs to use it and when. Burning SP on the wrong skill at the wrong moment means someone else on your team doesn't get to use theirs, and that can shift how a fight goes in a really big way. On top of that, the game has a combo skill system where chaining certain abilities between different party members in the right sequence triggers follow-up attacks that don't cost SP but have their own cooldown. Landing those consistently is where fights start to feel a bit more satisfying. Enemy resistance also play a meaningful role. There are different damage types, including physical, arts, and various elemental types, and enemies have their weaknesses and resistances to those. Characters belong to different classes as well. There are guards, defenders, casters, snipers, and so on, each with a distinct role and weapon type. Going in with a poorly thought out composition against the wrong enemy types will make a fight drag out more than it should. Once I started building teams that actually had synergy in mind and thinking about how to chain abilities between those operators, the combat became a thing that I looked more forward to rather than something I was just pushing through to get to the next story point. For a game in this genre, I think the combat system is above average, and I think it'll hold up well as you push into harder content as that releases. Now, I want to quickly touch on progression. Progression in Endfield works on several layers that all sort of stack on top of each other, and honestly, what I ended up finding was a pretty well designed progression system. It looks like a lot when you first look at it, but it does become intuitive pretty quickly, and the depth is genuinely there once you start engaging with it. At the base level, you're leveling operators through XP gained from exploring, completing missions, running events, and pretty much everything else in the game. Level caps are gated at different points, whether it be level 20, 40, 60, and beyond, and breaking through each cap requires specific promotion materials that you sort of gather from different areas of the map. What stood out to me about the progression pacing specifically was how consistently well stocked I felt with leveling materials throughout the full 30 hours. I never really hit a hard wall when I was sitting there with nothing to work on and no way to move forward. There was always a character that I could push to the next level threshold, or always a material cost that I was close to being able to cover. Beyond the base leveling, each operator has these ability nodes that can be ranked up independently. Pushing these rank ups produces changes that are actually visible in combat. They're not just minor damage percentage increases, but sometimes really shifts how a skill behaves or what it triggers. There are also talent nodes which unlock unique passive bonuses specific to each character, and that also adds another layer into how they fit into your team. There's also something called the potential phases, which lets you push a character further once you have duplicate copies. So at any point, if you pull two of the same character, you'd be able to use that duplicate to go ahead and improve the base character. In general, there are multiple ways to work on each operator, and there's this constant sense of forward progress that I really ended up enjoying. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about the gear system. Weapons come in different rarities from 3 stars up to 6 stars, and each weapon is locked to a specific weapon type tied to the operator's class. That sounds a little bit confusing, but guards use swords, defenders use great swords, some operators can use pole arms, others use hand cannons or arc units. Each weapon has 3 passive skills built directly into it: a generic attribute buff, a secondary stat boost, and a unique conditional effect that activates under specific combat circumstances. The third passive is where a lot of the build decision making lives, because it varies significantly between the different weapons and can definitely change how an operator performs. There are also these signature weapons designed for specific operators that pair tightly with their kit, though any operator of the same weapon type can equip them. So there's a bit of freedom there. For the gear slots themselves, each operator has 4: 1 armor piece, 1 pair of gloves, and 2 kit pieces. What I like the most about the gear system specifically is that all the stats on the gear pieces are already fixed. There isn't any random rolling, no hunting for the same piece 40 times hoping for a different substat. You know exactly what you're crafting before you make it, and that's very, very important in these types of games. That design choice really removes a lot of the tedium that drags down gear systems in similar games, and means that build crafting in Endfield is about making those choices rather than having to worry about some RNG system in place. Now, the game isn't completely devoid of RNG when it comes to the gear system. Essence also play a big role in building out your weapon rather than just your character. Enemies can drop these items, which provide a pretty big passive boost to different stats such as strength, intellect, agility, and so on, basically all the main abilities. And depending on your operator, these can go a long way in optimizing your build. So of course, there is that bit of RNG. You want to make sure you get the best essence to fit into your weapon slot, but honestly, that's really not too bad. Now, the gear does come in sets, and equipping 3 pieces from the same set activates a set bonus. If you've played really any kind of looter, then you're familiar with this type of system. Now, of course, I need to talk about probably the most complex system and one of the biggest systems that the game has, the Automated Industry Complex, or the AIC, which is the base management system and a feature in Endfield that I think will genuinely surprise people who come in expecting a standard action RPG. It's not a side system, it's one of those core pillars of the game, and the developers have talked about designing the experience around a roughly 50-50 balance between the RPG side and the factory building side. Whether you land closer to that split or lean harder into one side is up to you, but the base is something you need to engage with if you want to run things smoothly. The idea is that you're building a production facility that generates materials automatically. You're setting up mining nodes, running conveyor belts and pipes between processing stations. You're managing electricity and constructing production chains that convert basically basically raw material into refined components and finished goods. It draws obvious comparisons to games like Factorio or Satisfactory in terms of the overall logic behind it, though the scale is more approachable than either of those in my opinion. Of course, the complexity ramps up gradually, which helps a lot with learning it. Early setups are pretty simple and the game walks you through the basics reasonably well. As you unlock more building types, the chains get longer and more interconnected, and the decisions you have to make about the layout and resource routing really start to carry more weight. There's a blueprint system that lets you copy and save your own layouts, or you can apply community shared ones if you'd rather just completely skip that whole optimization thing. For me personally, I found the factory building to be genuinely interesting to tinker with. It's a system that I interacted quite a bit with, and a lot of my time was spending there just getting energy pylons connected to one another and getting some more mining nodes up, and starting this whole production facility was honestly pretty fun. Honestly, I was just pretty surprised by how in-depth this whole system is, and there's plenty for someone who's into that genre of games to chew on here. So the gacha system is something we just have to talk about. In Enfield, it follows the structure that most people familiar with the genre will recognize, but there are a few specific details that are worth knowing before going in. Operators come in different rarities from 4 stars all the way up to 6 stars. And the difference between the top and the bottom of that scale is kind of significant. The higher rarity operators tend to have stronger base stats, more complex ability kits, and their skills tend to have a much bigger impact on how a fight plays out. A 6-star operator isn't just doing more damage, they're often bringing something to a team that lower rarity characters simply can't replicate, whether that's a unique mechanic, a powerful passive that enables the rest of the party, or an ultimate that can really change a fight. That's ultimately why people chase them. The higher rarity operators are generally more capable, and the gap is noticeable enough that pulling a new 6-star and slotting them into your team actually changes how you play. The gacha system does have a pity mechanic in place, so you're not pulling forever without any results, and the game gives you a reasonable stream of pull currency through normal play. Now, I should mention that I didn't spend a single dollar throughout my time playing this game, and I was able to get multiple 6-star characters and the highest tier weaponry with just my normal currency, which I actually ended up liking quite a bit. Now, the ultimate question worth answering here is whether or not you even need to interact with this system to get your enjoyment out of the game, and truthfully, the answer is no. I hardly interacted with it and only did it when the game rewarded me currency, as I mentioned. The top tier 6-star characters are obviously very enticing, but I was able to progress pretty steadily with the pulls that came my way naturally and never felt the need or the urge to just go to the store and pull some more. And I should mention that weapons use a separate system funded by something called Arsenal tickets. The weapons follow the same rarity that the characters do. They go from 3-star all the way up to 6-star, with those 6-star weapons, of course, having those more complex abilities and being more stronger in general. To be honest, I didn't interact with the pull system as if I was really chasing something. Whenever I had the currency to do so or the tickets to do so, I would simply just make a pull. And if I got a 6-star character or a 5-star character, that's great. I would just slot them in and level them up. If I didn't, then I would just move on and continue playing the game as I normally would. Now, let's change tracks a little bit and talk about the world design. The world is divided into regions. Each has their own sort of visual character. There's these industrial ruins, there's a dense wilderness, there's more open, arid terrain. The environments are all pretty well built and varied enough that the world didn't really blur together across my 30 hours that I spent with it. Visually, the game is pretty impressive, especially considering it's running across PS5, PC, and mobile simultaneously. The production quality of these environments is honestly pretty good. After 30 hours with Enfield, I came away pretty satisfied with what I experienced. The combat system is where I had the most consistent fun, and I think it has quite a bit of depth that it just doesn't show up on the surface level. Exploration held up well across the full 30 hours that I played. The world gave me consistent reasons to stray off the main path, and the game does a good job of making sure that the time spent exploring translates to meaningful progression. I regularly found myself losing stretches of time just moving through different regions and seeing what was there. The one thing I'll mention is that the main story progression is gated behind your authority level, which is a measure of your overall operator power. There were points where the next main story mission asked for a level that I hadn't hit yet, and that pointed me back to the open world to get there first. I understand the design logic behind that, but if I want to just push the main story, it would have just been nice to do that the whole time. Now, I want to quickly touch on technical performance. I played the game on PS5, and for the most part, it ran pretty smoothly. The only real performance hiccup I ran into was some occasional frame drops during the free roam exploration. Nothing too severe, just noticeable enough for me to mention. Outside of that, the experience was stable and consistent. The resolution looked pretty great on PS5. The environments are detailed and the character models hold up pretty well on a bigger screen considering this is a mobile game. It also just felt natural to play on the controller. The inputs were responsive and nothing about the layout felt like I was fighting the game's design. Load times were decently fast and I didn't run into any crashes across my full 30 hours. For a live service game, I felt like the technical state was pretty solid on PS5. Arknights Endfield is officially available on PS5, PC, and mobile, and it's a perfect time to jump into the game with the Rising Tide update featuring new operators, new weapons, and new gear sets along with a brand new area. Thank you guys for watching as always. I'll see you all in the next one.